Hi, my name's Jonathan Pickup. Welcome to my Vectorworks Architect course. This course is specifically set up for students who are using Vectorworks in India. So we'll be using a Indian style house. We're going to look at two houses. They're actually identical, single unit dwellings on a site. This is the project we're going to work on. It's got cars, it's got buildings, it's got doors and windows, it's got surrounding area, it's got a site. We need to calculate the area of the house, the area of the site. We also need to look at different views. This is one view. We're also going to look at the building from here and also from here. And we're going to look at rendering. How do we model it? You don't have to draw a house exactly the same as this. It's just an idea. But we do need to look at how do we develop the house. How do we use wall styles? How do we make sure that we keep things consistent? How do we put the roof on? How do we make parapet walls and so on? You might call this the start of the second part of the course. The first part of the course was going through some fundamental Vectorworks information. How do we draw walls, put in doors and windows? How do we select things? How do we control things? Now that we know that, what we have to do is to apply it, and apply it in a real project. So that's what we're going to do. Let's get started with a real project, and we'll start with a new blank file. File in the menu bar, New. And we're going to start with a blank document. So let's go through all the things we need to do to set up a project. Let's go ahead and set up our project. File on the menu bar, Document Settings, and Document Setup. Let's start by choosing our units. If you're using millimeters, then choose millimeters, and we can put in our areas square meters, volume is cubic meters, and we can set our decimal precision. If you've got clients that use feet and inches but you want to use millimeters, we can also do that. If you would prefer to use feet and inches, then change to feet and inches. We're going to have a fractional rounding style, maybe to the nearest eighth of an inch. We'd want to set our area to square feet and our volume probably to cubic yards. And then maybe change our Enagos to imperial. Some of these settings might depend on your client. For this project, I'm going to be using millimeters, square feet, square meters, and cubic meters. You might have clients that want to see dimensions in feet and inches, so you could set up dual dimensions and use those. However, I'm going to set up my dual dimensions so that I can dimension my site plan in meters. I want to use a decimal style. I want my decimal precision to be 3 decimal places and 5. So this will round my dimensions to the nearest 5 millimeters. And I'm going to use trailing zeros. That will put the 3 decimal places at the back of my meter dimensions, even if I don't actually need them. Click OK. And that's done that part. What about my layer scale? For this project, a layer scale of about 1 to 50 or 1 to 100 is going to be great. If you're using imperial, you might choose quarter or eighth of an inch. What about my drawing area? Well, let's set up our drawing area so it's consistent for everything we set up. I'm going to choose my printer. I'm going to choose a page size of about A3, and it's going to be landscape. So A3 is about 17 by 12 inches. Click OK, and now my grid. Now I quite like using a snap grid of around about 4 inches, 100 millimeters, and a reference grid of about a meter, which is 3 feet 3 inches, or 3 feet for you, if you're using imperial. Now the purpose of using your snap grid and your reference grid is, we're not going to use the snap grid to draw to. But the reference grid is really useful for giving us an idea of how big things are. So setting a reference grid of a meter, and then every project uses the same reference grid so that we consistently use the same size. It's a great way of making sure that you're not accidentally being confused between millimeters and meters. Now we're not going to use georeferencing, so we'll leave that alone, and we'll come back to our title block later. Click OK, and there's our piece of paper on our design layer. Before we get into actually drawing our walls, why don't we take some time to set up our text styles, our dimension standards, and some of our preferences, because it will really speed us up later. Let's start with our text styles. Text on the menu bar, format text. We've been through this once before, so it should be familiar, but I'll go through it again quickly. Choose your font, and this can often depend on who your client is, so make sure you're choosing the font that suits that client. Maybe using this font, or whatever. So I'm going to set my font up to be just a standard Arial narrow font. I like Arial narrow because it's slightly compressed. We can make it bold or not. We can set our alignment to the top left. And we're going to save this as 10 point and click on the save button. So the save button allows us to save this, and I'm going to call it Arial narrow 10 point. So Arial narrow 10 point, click OK. So that will save that as a text style that I can use again and again. Now I might have another one where I want to make that 12 point, so let's save that. This is 12 point. Now the reason I call the text style Arial narrow 12 point is so that I know exactly what the font is and I won't be confused later on. There are going to be times where you want to have some quite large text. So you could take one of these text styles you've already created. We could make it larger. We could set that to be bold perhaps, and maybe center justified. Let's save that as well. And click OK. So we now have a series of text styles saved. Arial narrow, but you can also save these to your library. That's what these ones are. These are coming from the Vectorworks library, and you can save them to your Vectorworks library so that they're available on every project. Click OK. So we've set up our text style. Now let's set up our dimension standard. When you place a dimension, you get to choose the dimension standard. I'm just going to zoom in to show you that one. So we've got a start point here, then we've got an offset before the start of our witness line, we've got a length, we've got the size of the slash, we've got the offset of that text from the dimension line. And all of these things are changeable. If we click here, we can see all of our text styles. So let's just go through those first of all before we go too far. We've got Arch, we've got ASME, we've got that one, we've got ISO standards, and so on. But we also have the ability to have custom standards. We can choose what kind of dimension standard we want to use from this pop-up menu. Arch, ASME. And if you choose it up here, then every dimension you create from then on will use that standard. You can also use a custom standard. Now just before we select that, just notice Arch is my dimension standard here. Let's go to custom standards, and when I click the new button, Vectorworks will make a copy of my default standard, which was Arch. So this is going to be a copy of Arch, and I'm going to call it plans because I'm going to use this for my plans. Let's edit that, and here we are. So that's the offset of my text. I'm going to make that very small. We've got that offset there. Now these are all in page millimeters, so it doesn't matter what scale your drawing is, these will always look the same. Fixed witness line length, so I'm going to fix the length from here down to the end of that black line. It won't matter where I click, it'll always be the same fixed length. I'm going to make that about 7 millimeters. We've got offsets there, we've got offsets here. These really suit the way you draw, so you do need to make these changes based on the way you like to draw. I've got some favorite things I quite like, and they're pretty basic. I just like everything to a nice round number. But let me show you something else, these linear markers. I want to choose a linear marker that will look the way that I want. So let's look at one of these, or we can create our own custom marker. If we edit the marker list, we can delete the markers we don't like. So I can delete several of those. I can also edit a marker. For example, I might edit this one. Let's edit that, and we'll change that to a slash. We'll make it 3 millimeters on the printed page. We'll use a custom thickness, and I quite like putting in millimeters, so 0.7. So this makes quite a fat, dark line, quite a very heavy slash on the end of my dimension standard, which I quite like. If you remove all of these markers that you don't use, you'll find it very easy to create markers that you want, or very easy to choose them, because they'll just be there. Okay, let's edit this one as well, and let's go to edit marker list. I'm going to choose that one and edit it, and I want that to be an arrow open, 45 degrees, length 3 millimeters again, custom thickness. Again, I want to use that very heavy thickness, 0.7. Okay, okay again, and this one here I might choose this one, and again I might edit my marker list. Let's edit that and make it 2 millimeters, so it's a smaller circle. So it's an oval, length, angle 2 millimeters and 2 millimeters. So it's a nice small circle. Okay, okay. So there we are. There's our layout. It's single. What text style do we want? We can assign our text style that we just created to our dimensions so that every time we place a dimension, it's got the same size text. No messing around with what text it should use. And now let's click OK again. So let's change that back to our new dimension standard, plans. And there it is. Let's just check our dimension standard because we may have made a mistake. Back up to here, custom standards, let's look at plans, and we'll edit that. Now it might be that I forgot to choose that heavy marker that I made, so let's click OK again. And you'll notice in the background there, I'd forgotten to get the right slash on it, but notice how when you fix it, all your dimensions will update. So from now on, I'm going to use my plans. I'm going to create another dimension standard for my site plans. Click New. Now you might remember up here I chose my plans. So when I click on New, it creates a copy of that. Site plans. Let's edit that. And here it is, a perfect copy of the previous dimension standard. Every setting is exactly the same. My linear markers are the same. My text style is the same. But what I'm going to change is the layout. And I want dual side by side, and I want to use my secondary units only. If you remember, I set my dual dimensions to meters. So here you could tell Vectorworks to create a new dimension standard that used feet and inches rather than meters. And that way you've got two dimensioning styles. Okay, and okay. So what happens to this dimension when we change that from plans to site plans? Change it back to plans. So we've got these two dimension styles, almost identical, except one shows meters and one shows millimeters. So we can get rid of that. Let's go back to our overall drawing. And let's have a look at some of these labels that we're going to use. This is a drawing label, and if we just zoom in and have a look at that, there it is. Now it's showing us the drawing only. We might want to show drawing in sheet. We might want to control the text style of that. So it might want to use 14-point text or 12-point text, and this one might want to use 10, and so on. So make those settings the way you want, and then we need to save that as a standard. When you select this tool, you might notice up here there are preferences, and these preferences control how it's going to look, whether it's got auto fit and so on. Now earlier on, you will have learnt to use something like the eyedropper tool. If I just change this to have a red color to it, that's easier to choose, so it's got a red fill. If you remember, the eyedropper tool allows you to pick up attributes from one object and put them down onto others. So for example, we can copy that attribute and we can put it onto that one. But if we go back to have a look at our settings here, one of the things we can do is to pick up the plugin parameters. When you pick up the plugin parameters, it allows you to copy the plugin parameters from one object and put them onto another. So for example, if we had the settings for this label, we could pick up the size of the text and what the text says and whether it's got numbers and sheets. And we could use that and apply it to another drawing label. If you click this, pick up sets defaults, when you click on that object, not only does it copy those attributes, but it applies them to that tool as the default values. So let's just have a look at this. Before we go too far, let's grab one of those and we'll put one in, and you'll notice it's not quite the same. Let's go to our eyedropper tool, and we're going to pick up our plugin parameters and set them as the defaults. So back to that mode, click, and now if we go back to our drawing label, you'll notice it's not a copy of this one, it's a copy of that one, the one that I've edited. So changing your objects and copying their parameters and saving them as the defaults is fantastic for this. I'd like you to save this file before you go too far. So save your file into your exercise folder. Now I've called mine step 2, and the reason I've done that is so that if you mess up with this part of it, you can open my file and you can work on step 2, which is where we put in the design layers and stories. Click on the save button, and now every time you save the file, it'll be saving a copy of this file. It's also extremely useful for you to make sure that you set up a backup. Vectorworks preferences and autosave. So I autosave every 30 operations. I do not confirm before save. I autosave a backup copy to a custom location, and I keep the last 5 most recent backups. Now that might sound like I'm keeping a lot of files, which you can always clean out later on if you need to. But it's really useful for you to save a backup copy. You don't know when Vectorworks is going to crash, and if it does, you really need to make sure that you've kept your up-to-date work. You might be like me, and you might forget to save it while you're in the heat of the moment, so please, make sure you create a backup. In the previous exercises, we looked at design layers, sheet layers, and we looked at classes. Classes are going to be extremely useful, and you're going to need to create a lot of classes that suit your drawing technique. Now it might be that we can't create all the classes we need at the moment, but it's a good idea to try. So let's create some classes. Right click, let's create a new class. We want to create a new class. So we know we're going to create a site model. So we're going to create site-model. Click OK. We're also going to create other very similar things. New site-boundary. We will be importing a project, and we'll be looking at a Google Earth project. We'll be using it to draw the site, to get the adjoining neighbors, and so on. Another way to quickly create classes is to use the import classes. This file has also been copied to you as part of your course. So if you have a look at the downloads folder, you should find this file. Click on the choose button to find it, and now you can find an easy way to create classes. For example, if we need some massing model classes, you can just select them, click OK, and Vectorworks will import those classes for you. I'll just pull the navigation palette out here and show you what it looks like. So you can see I've got a hierarchy here. I'm using my hierarchical display. So all my massing model classes are hidden under the heading massing model. All my site classes are hidden under the title site. Another way to create your classes is to click on this button here. Then click on the new button and then create the classes you need. We will be creating a lot of walls, so you'll have to create some wall classes. Again, you can either create them yourself by typing it in here, or you can import them. You might create new classes for walls. You might create existing walls for classes. You'll notice when I'm using the organization dialog box, it doesn't disappear after I've created a new class, so I can carry on creating more and more classes if I want. Remember, if you've got a file that's already got classes in it, you can import those classes from that file. Click OK. Now I'm going to put my navigation palette back. Now I'm using a Windows machine. I get these little icons here where I can click on it to choose where I want to store that navigation palette. If using a Macintosh, you'll find that the area highlights in blue as you move the palette around.